This is the Book Legion Podcast, where we review thought-provoking books to give our Legionnaires the knowledge they need to dominate the next level of their life.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for joining me this week on the Book Legion. This is your host, Tyser Evans. This week I'm going to be reviewing a book called Rock Bottom to Rock Star by Ryan Blair. So I got this book originally from Ryan Blair, I think off of a funnel on Facebook a couple years ago. I'd heard of him before as a really good and famous entrepreneur, really successful young entrepreneur, and he was like, hey, if you buy this book, you'll get all of my knowledge, and then I'm signing a free copy. I've actually had a little bit of interaction with his team online, some of his mastermind programs. So as a book that honestly I bought and sat on the shelf, I never read. I was really impressed with some of his content online. Being a spiritual entrepreneur, or a spiritualpreneur, as he likes to call it, I did one of his meditation sessions, and I said I interacted with and found out more about his mastermind program from someone on his team. So I went back to the book and picked it up, Rock Bottom to Rock Star. So if you don't know much about Ryan Blair, he was someone who had a lot of problems as a teen. Grew up kind of a single mother household until his mother married his stepfather, Bob, who was really influential on his life. Got involved in gang violence. He's a guy that, like me, has got tattoos. Not that means anything in 2023, but had a rocky start and had a lot of trouble. But was really smart, really creative. As he got into college, he ended up going to Cal Lutheran, going to business college, and become an entrepreneur while in college, and decided his senior year, instead of finishing college, to launch out and go 120% on his business, because his business had become wildly successful while he was in college. So the book is really based on life stories, business principles, and kind of personal development. He really did a good job writing the book. I was telling my buddy that I really enjoyed reading it. He's like, man, you've been talking about that book a lot. And I said, well, it's great because he's an awesome storyteller. He's a great writer. There's lots of business takeaways, and there's lots of just personal takeaways with trials and tribulations he went through his life, how that affected his business, how his business affected his personal life. He did a great job interweaving all these different things throughout the book. The book is roughly about 215 pages. I think you can pick it up on Amazon now. It was written in 2016 for probably about $15. So I'm going to cover my top 3 chapters and some of the takeaways in those chapters. So let's jump into it. So the first takeaway came from chapter 3, which is pay attention to your timeline. And so what I loved about this chapter is he hits it early and often. It's something that not enough business books or personal developments really books talk about, is that you have to be a highly successful person to get everything out of life. And this does not always mean monetarily success. This could be going all in on your hobbies, going all in on your spirituality, whatever it is, going all in your family, your travel, whatever it is. That one thing is going to take away from something else, right? And so if you have a dream, a passion of something that you want to be great at, or you want to accomplish in your life, you have to really examine how you spend your timeline. You have to realize that every decision you make today accumulates for who you are becoming tomorrow. And so many of us, we continue to live the same day after day, day after day, day after day, and we do the same habits time after time after time, while thinking and knowing we want something different, but we're not consciously aware of our hobbies, who we're hanging out of, how we spend our weekends, how we spend our nights, and how those things start to add up with the different ways that we allocate our time. You always hear that old adage that everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. That is 100% true. Everyone does, right? And so how do some people make 40 grand a year and do that their whole life versus some people that make 40 billion? And a lot of it has to do with how people allocate their time. This is why I tell people the only TV I really watch is basketball. I enjoy watching a good Warriors game. They're playing the Kings right now, which is tough for me because of my 2 favorite teams. But short of that, you'll typically find me in a book, working out, spending time with my kids, out on the basketball court. I'm always kind of doing something that I feel like is moving me forward, or something that I truly enjoy. Every once in a while, I'll watch a show or a movie with my wife, but I don't feel like that's productive in the sense of moving me forward. But I think it's good every once in a while to have that downtime. But to do that day after day, to binge Netflix night after night, is really his point of this chapter, is be very cognizant of how you're spending your time and who you're spending your time with, because that is the person that you're building for your future self. So in chapter 6 is the second chapter I want to talk about, and this is identifying yourself. And what I really like about this is that he really is very vulnerable at talking about his strengths and his weaknesses. And a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of business owners, especially small business owners, they get really wrapped up in wearing all the hats, right? And that's because they have a really hard time with delegation. They feel like they're the best at everything or every aspect of their business. And while that may be true, it's really hard to scale a business if you're the one doing every single component. If you're the marketer, you're the salesperson, right? You're the CFO, you're the CEO. It's really hard to scale a business that way. So he talks about really identifying who you are, what your strengths are, and what your genius is within your business, and then hiring great people around you to cover your blind spots, to cover your weaknesses. And so he gives lots of great examples and stories in the book about how he hired a team and he worked with other co-founders that had their own genius. And he did, he's most famously noticed for selling the company for about $800 million, right? Taking it from nothing up to about $800 million was his exit. But he had 2 other startup companies. So he has a lot of experience with startups and scaling them to different levels of success. So he's always surrounded himself with teams in which he'd be brought up by his weaknesses. And then he also talks about it in this chapter, identifying who you are and what motivates you. Why do you show up to work? What do you love about your company? And he had this chance to meet Tony Robbins as a potential investor in his company at the time. And Tony Robbins was asking him some really basic questions about what do you love about your company? And he said the people. And what he realized is that he really loved the culture he'd built, and he shows up to serve his people, like understanding that he loves seeing his sales guys, have $100,000 commission. He loves seeing his sales guys go out and kill it and, elevate the quality of their life as much as it is elevating the quality of his life. And I think oftentimes too, most people sometimes can create a job out of their business, right? They start a business and end up creating themselves a job. And they get disgruntled by creating themselves a job, and they don't go back to why are they there, who are they serving, what was their passion. And I think that the E-Myth does a great job of breaking down this phenomenon that happens in business all the time too. So some really good tactical takeaways, some really great stories in here with Tony Robbins with regard how to analyze your business, what's your genius, what's your purpose, what's your why, who are you serving, and as long as you can come back to your mission. He talks a lot about Steve Jobs being a huge influence of how you construct your business. It makes it more meaningful when you hit those low points, when you get those challenges in business. And he had a ton of challenges with short sellers going after him, boards going after him, competitors going after him. He had some really crazy stories throughout the book of how he was able to challenge this, mixed with a lot of personal challenges where he talks about his son getting developed with autism, his stepfather who was a role model dying, his mother falling down a flight of stairs, cracking her skull and being in a coma for 2 years while he was going through his son being diagnosed with autism, and he was being attacked from his competitors, the board, trying to take a company public, and then not taking it public, and all kinds of crazy stuff in between. And then the last thing I want to talk about is chapter 11, which he writes is the wrong kind of success. And again, that was one of his dreams, is take a company public, ring the bell on Wall Street, have an IPO, and be a CEO of a publicly traded company. Now, he had this opportunity. It was all a go. He was the one that had to give the final okay. Bankers were pushing him. Investors were pushing him. And ultimately, he had to say no because he didn't think it was the right time and they're in the right position. And it wasn't the right time for his business. So it was really interesting walking you through his thought process of he was all go moving forward, then started to notice market trends and different things happening, and he just had this gut feeling that wasn't the right time. Now, which was credible that he was poised to make about $34 million by this whole thing happening. And he still said no because it was the right kind of success, right? He didn't think that it would give him the pop and the wealth that he had always imagined. It might have even been more than that. It might have been closer to 70 million was what he was going to make. Anyway, a significant amount of money for a guy in his 30s. And he just knew in his gut that it wasn't the right thing to do long-term for the company and or for the people at the company, so he said no. It's had a lot of respect. I can't imagine, I'm in my 30s having to make that type of decision to leave 8 figures on the table. But he had the insight enough, and long-term it was the right decision. If he would have done that, there was a bunch of short sellers out there that went and destroyed his competition. They were in the public space, but by them saying private, they didn't have shores to be short sold and to have these stock traders go after them, which they went after their competition since they didn't go public. It ended up hurting the investment company that he was with, which he made right and did some things to help them later on down the road from some people he really respected. So the end result was he still was able to do all the things he wanted, but he had to sacrifice at the time of what he initially thought he wanted and hold off on some delayed gratification to ultimately get the end result, but it was the wrong kind of success. So he walks you through what was the right type of success and what was the wrong type of success. He also talks about someone who looks like me, someone who is authentically themselves in the corporate environment. I don't remember what chapter this is on, but I really appreciated. They talked about wearing suit and ties, and that he got rid of all those, and he just started showing up in jeans, Converse, and t-shirts. That's authentically who he was into board meetings and with investors, and it rubbed people the wrong way. And for me, for a long time, I never got full sleeves because I was worried of my perception in the corporate environment. And eventually I just got over that and said, hey man, it all that matters is the value that I have in my mind that I'm able to contribute in the way that I've served people. And I wish I would have done it sooner because it doesn't really matter. And I've had sleeves now, and I make more money than I did 10 years ago when I was worried about it. So he talks about that, how to authentically be yourself and how to identify and build your own brand, right? Because you have to be remembered for something. And, especially in today's world, building your own personal brand is so important. I can't really explain to you how much I really enjoyed the book because there was about 17 chapters in the book. Again, he's a phenomenal storyteller. There's so many different great takeaways, professionally and personally. And he's very vulnerable with his mindset and walks you through his failures. He has a whole chapter on that. He does a great job of being really vulnerable in the book, which I really appreciated. Ryan's a great storyteller. He also has another book that came out before this in 2013 called Nothing to Lose. You can find him on Ryan Blair on any of the social media channels. He's a great person to follow. I'll make sure I'll post a link in the bio so you guys can purchase the book. So if you're looking for a business book / personal development book, especially if you're a solopreneur, you own a small business, I'd say from 5 to 50 employees, it's a great book because he gives you all different ways of how to tactically look at a business, but then also tells you things that you should be looking at in your personal life and things that you should be holding yourself accountable for that are going to impact and influence your business. And that was, for me, was the big takeaway. It wasn't all a business book. It wasn't all personal development book. It was a good mix-up of both within the book, which I really enjoyed. So make sure I have it posted. If you guys haven't done so, please subscribe to the podcast. We really appreciate all of your support. And make sure to check out my other podcast, Grind, Sell, Elevate. If you guys haven't done so as well, I started a clothing company called Odin's Rune, which is ODINSRUNE.com. So for those of you that are into motivational fitness type clothing with a little bit of a Nordic type twist, go check that out, OdinsRune.com. Appreciate you guys subscribing and can't wait to review the next book next week. Thanks so much.